Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. The next question comes from Sean C. And this is in response to a rare talent to ruin a synth TB bassline on the fly video I did in May 2022. Sean writes, "Hey, great video, but I wanted to comment something. I heard we need to be careful how we discuss the evolution of synths. Yes, the Poly 6 one was a fantastic synth and one of my favourites of all time, but nobody should second guess their decision in the 80s to upgrade to a DX7. Yes, the DX7 was a synth of the day, of the decade even, and not because of marketing. It was a synth to own because it had the sound that everybody needed for their gigs. The sounds, the DX7, also the DX piano alone was enough to justify upgrading from a Poly 800 or a Poly 61. That sound defined the 80s and without that synth, as a working keyboardist, you were basically sunk. Now in 2022, we appreciate analogue equipment from the years gone by and lament the Juno 106 silver pennies of the current value. I wonder if in 50 years' time we'll all be lamenting the superior lo-fi sounds of the 1998 Microsoft Zoom MP3 player over the 2072 iPhone 1300's crystal clear audio." God, I remember the Microsoft Zoom. Oh dear. I nearly had one as well. I didn't. I invested in an Apple iPod. Yeah, the white one. Does everyone remember the white iPod? Oh dear. I know many people, including me, sold keyboards 20 years ago. I mean, that was the bottom line. And you know, the fact that they are now selling in some cases for more than a manufacturer actually sold the original for is just one of those things. I understand your comment about musicians in some sectors had to move with the industry trends and continue your example of the early 80s, the sound of the Yamaha DX7, or if you had deep pockets, the D5 and the D1, and then along came the Roland D series and all the acts were playing the Roland D50, and then a few years later the Korg Triumph trumped them all with the Korg M1. But that was only several sectors of the market. There are other reasons for upgrading during the 80s and 90s and beyond, and that was workflow and automation. Some of the synths we've talked about on the channel, including the contentious videos relating to the Poly 61, which sparked this particular trend, had issues relating to repeatability, transportability and usability. What do I mean by this? Repeatability. The analog synths and the first generation of digital synths did not have the ability to recall a previously created patch. People became creative and had handwritten patch templates. In fact, I can actually remember a book of synth templates. The idea was you photocopied the template for your synth and then you marked or wrote the values of each section of the synth, and thus produced a patch that could be recreated by entering dial-in or in the recorded values that you'd written on this piece of paper. The newer synths gave you a cartridge and you pressed a button, you could back up a single patch or the entire synth to a cartridge. The patches could be restored in a few minutes or maybe seconds, depending on how good the synth was. Transportability. You didn't need to lug your keyboards about. Your source copies, you sourced copies of the synthesizer locally and load your sounds in from some sort of backup media. This would have been a cartridge or in the early days, a card, or moving on floppy disks and moving on a little bit more USB media. In reality, you just plug in your Mac and transfer the files onto the target keyboard. Finally, usability. But it got worse before it got better. The 80s synths could be utter gits to program. I can remember this, and I still do remember this programming a D50 or a DX7 for argument's sake. The functions and settings were hidden in layers deep menus, and some bright spark invented the programmer, and the sounds could be tweaked from a user-friendly interface, assuming you actually understood how the synth worked. And that was kind of the key to this sort of area, was you had to understand how the synth worked. In the DX7 days, how did the algorithm put the oscillators together? In the D50, how were the filters structured and the envelope structured and stuff like that? Unless you understood that, even if you had a user-friendly algorithm or a user-friendly programmer, you were still kind of just twiddling knobs in the dock, if you like. But exploring that further is probably going to be a different video to this response. Next one comes from Roland Fantos in response to Revenge of the Clone Part 5, Fact or Fiction. Can you swap hard drives between receptors? A video I did in March 2022. And he writes, or she writes, great to see it's proven you can swap the drives. I don't own a Rev C receptor. I have 3 receptors, Receptor 2, so I can't say if it can be done with a Receptor 2. You can with OS 2.0.1 clone your drive via USB. It worked for me. I'd seen so many conflicting statements. I have to try it out. I think half the problem is, as you point out, the Muse operating system matured, that added more housekeeping functions that weren't available in previous operating systems. The Rev C only used operating system, or could only be used for up to operating system 1.7. But I have proved it. There is more video in the series. Before Revenge of the Clone is finished, and that's true. There is more.